The great chamber of the Galactic Council fell silent as High Arbiter Vextolin raised his three-fingered hand. 12 alien species had gathered beneath the massive crystal dome of Station Nexus. Prime and their representatives sat in a perfect circle around the central speaking platform. For 300 years, this chamber had governed the known galaxy and made decisions that affected trillions of lives across thousands of worlds. Today, it would make a decision that would haunt them all for generations to come. Ambassador. Laura Bennett stood at the human delegation platform with her hands folded calmly in front of her. She was 53 years old, with streaks of silver running through her dark hair, and she had the kind of quiet confidence that came from 20 years of diplomatic service. Beside her stood Deputy Ambassador Kevin Tate, who was reviewing information on his tablet while trying to hide the frustration building in his chest. They both knew what was coming, but they had hoped until the last moment that things might turn out differently. Vextolin cleared his throat, and his voice echoed through the translation devices that allowed all species to understand each other. He announced that the motion before them was clear, and that Species 7412, known as humanity, had repeatedly violated protocol 17 regarding unauthorized expansion into the Varus cluster. He said that humans had ignored 17 formal warnings, and that the Kalari Dominion was now moving for immediate expulsion from the Council along with the cancellation of all trade agreements. Laura Bennett took a slow breath before responding. She stated that the Varus cluster was completely uninhabited when human colony ships arrived there. She explained that they found nothing but barren rocks and dead worlds, and that humanity had terraformed those planets at their own expense, using their own technology and their own labor. She asked how this could be considered a violation, when no one else wanted those worlds. Representative Crixel of the Kalari clicked his mandibles together in a gesture that showed his contempt. He was a tall insectoid creature with gleaming black eyes, and he had never hidden his dislike for the young human species. He declared that the cluster was designated as a future expansion zone for the Kalari people, and that humanity knew this when they sent their ships there. Kevin Tate could not stay quiet any longer. He pointed out that the designation was made 4,000 years ago, and that the Kalari did never once move to claim those worlds in all that time. He asked if humanity was supposed to wait another 4,000 years for the Kalari to maybe decide to use worlds they clearly did not want. Crixel hissed that the law was the law and that human opinions about Kalari intentions were irrelevant. Laura Bennett watched the chamber carefully as this exchange took place. She had been warning Earth's government for months that this moment was approaching. Humanity had joined the Galactic Council only 60 years ago, making them the youngest member species by a very wide margin. They had been too eager and too ambitious, and too willing to push against boundaries that older civilizations had learned to accept without question. But she also understood something deeper about what was happening here. The Kalari had been pushing for human expulsion since the very beginning of humanity's membership. They feared how quickly humans multiplied and spread across the stars. They were disturbed by humanity's ability to adapt to conditions that would kill other species. They were threatened by human creativity and innovation and stubborn refusal to accept that anything was impossible. The Varus cluster was simply an excuse and not the real reason for this vote. She spoke again and requested time to negotiate a proper settlement. She suggested that perhaps the Kalari would accept fair compensation for the disputed worlds, since humanity was willing to pay a reasonable price for what they had built. Vextolin turned his pale eyes toward the Kalari delegation, and then swept his gaze across the entire chamber. He announced that the Kalari had refused all negotiation offers and that they demanded complete expulsion, along with the immediate evacuation of all human settlements in the Varus cluster. He then asked if any representative from any species wished to speak in humanity's defense. Silence filled the chamber like a physical weight. Laura Bennett looked around the circle at each delegation in turn. The Trexian ambassador suddenly found the floor very interesting and would not meet her eyes. The Vorn delegation whispered among themselves, but none of them raised a hand or spoke a word. Even the Crystalline Collective, who had traded extensively with Earth, and had always seemed friendly toward. Humans remained completely still and silent. Not one voice rose to defend them. Not one species was willing to stand against the Kaleri. Vextolin nodded slowly, as if he had expected nothing different. He announced that they would proceed to vote and asked all those in favor of expulsion to indicate their support. 11 hands and claws and various appendages rose into air. He then asked for those opposed to the motion. Nothing. No one moved. No one spoke. Vextolin declared that humanity was hereby expelled from the Galactic Council effective immediately. He stated that all trade agreements were now void, and that human vessels had 30 standard days to leave Council space entirely. Laura Bennett nodded, as if she had known this would happen all along. In truth, she had prepared for this outcome, even while hoping it would not come to pass. She spoke clearly, and said that the delegation accepted the Wind Council's decision, and that humanity would comply with the evacuation order. Then she paused, and something in her voice made several representatives look up with uncertain expressions. She said that she wanted the official record to show that humanity came to this council in good faith, seeking genuine partnership. She reminded them that humans had offered their technology and their medicine, and their willingness to serve on dangerous missions that other species declined to undertake. She stated that humanity had asked only for the same respect given to any other member species. Vextolin told her that her statement was noted in the record. She replied that she was not yet finished. Her eyes moved slowly across the chamber, meeting the gaze of each representative in turn. She said she wanted the record to show that when humanity needed allies, they found none. When they asked for fairness, they received only politics. When they offered genuine friendship, they were met with nothing but fear. She gathered her documents from the platform, and her final words hung in the air like a promise, or perhaps a warning. She told them that they had made their choice, and now humanity would make theirs. She turned and walked from the chamber with Kevin Tate following close behind her. The great doors sealed shut with a heavy sound that seemed to echo much longer than it should have in the silence that followed. Representative Morvex of the Trexian hegemony leaned toward his aide and whispered a question. He asked what she had meant by that and what choice humanity could possibly make. The aide had no answer to give him. 3 weeks later, the last human freighter departed from station. Nexus Prime, carrying the final group of human workers and traders and diplomats who had lived and worked there. Captain Daniel Shaw stood on the observation deck, watching the massive station grow, smaller and smaller in the viewport, until it was just another point of light among millions. His first officer, Patricia Gomez, stood beside him and said quietly that it was really over now. Shaw nodded and said that it certainly looked that way. She asked him what would happen next, and what humanity was supposed to do now. He turned away from the viewport and started walking toward the bridge. He told her that now they would go home and figure out how to survive without the council and without their trade routes and without their so-called allies who had abandoned them without a second thought. Behind them, the Galactic Council's navigation beacon continued to pulse its eternal signal into the endless void of space. Humanity would not answer that signal again for a very long time. 5 years passed after humanity left the Galactic Council, and at first nobody really noticed they were gone. The galaxy was enormous, and humans had occupied such a tiny corner of it. Trade routes adjusted themselves within months. Supply chains found new paths and new suppliers. The Varus cluster colonies were evacuated right on schedule, and the Kaleri proudly announced their plans to begin settling those worlds within the next decade. Everything seemed fine. Everything seemed normal. The Council continued its meetings and passed its resolutions, and the older species congratulated themselves on removing a troublesome young race before they could cause any real problems. But then small things began to change. It started with medical supplies. During their 60 years of membership, humanity had developed treatments for 17 different diseases that affected multiple council species. They had shared these medicines freely as part of their membership agreements, and nobody had thought much about it at the time. Humans were good at medicine, and they seemed happy to help, so why question it? Now those supplies stopped coming, and Council researchers discovered something troubling. Replicating human pharmaceutical processes was far more difficult than anyone had assumed. The formulas were available, but making them work was another matter entirely. Dr. Valenac stood before the Council's science advisory board and tried to explain what they were dealing with. He said that human biochemistry was simply different from other species in ways that were hard to understand. He explained that human bodies processed chemical compounds through pathways that did not exist in other life forms. Their immune systems worked differently. Their cells regenerated differently. Their neural chemistry followed patterns that seemed almost random yet somehow produced remarkable results. He told the board that humans had developed medicines in 60 years that had taken Council species thousands of years to create. He admitted that he did not fully understand how they had done it, that recreating their work might take decades or even centuries. The Trexian hegemony was the first to feel the real impact of this problem. A plague swept through 3 of their core worlds, and the treatment that had kept it contained for centuries was running out. The Trexian government sent urgent requests to humanity through neutral channels, begging for more supplies and offering to pay any price. Requests went completely unanswered. At an emergency council session, the Trexian ambassador suggested that perhaps humanity had not received their messages. Perhaps there was some communication problem that prevented the requests from reaching the right people. High Arbiter Vextolin shook his head slowly. He looked older now, and the stress of the past 5 years showed clearly on his face. He told the ambassador that their intelligence networks had confirmed that all communications were reaching their intended destinations. He said that humans had received every single message and had simply chosen not to respond to any of them. The Trexian ambassador could not believe what he was hearing. He asked if humanity would really let millions of innocent people die over a political dispute. He said that surely humans were not that cruel, and that surely they would help if they understood how. Desperate the situation had become, Crixel of the Kaleri made a clicking sound that passed for laughter among his species. He declared that humans were merely posturing and trying to prove some kind of primitive point. He said confidently that they would give in eventually because no species could ignore such suffering forever. But humanity did not give in. They did not respond. They did not send medicine or supplies or even a single word of acknowledgement. The Trexian plague claimed 40 million lives before Council scientists finally developed an alternative treatment. The new medicine was less effective than the human version, and it caused severe side effects in many patients, but it was better than watching more people die. The Trexian people survived, but they did not forget what had happened, and they did not forget who had refused to help them. Other problems began to emerge as the years went by. Human engineers had been responsible for maintaining the deep space relay network in several important sectors. Without their expertise, communication gaps started appearing in messages that once traveled instantly now took days or weeks to arrive. Human pilots had crewed the dangerous salvage missions near unstable singularities where space itself twisted and warped in unpredictable ways. No other species was willing to take those risks for the pay that was offered, so the valuable wrecks simply drifted untouched. And then there was the matter of the drift. The drift was a vast region of space, where the normal laws of physics behaved strangely. Gravity fluctuated without warning. Time moved at different speeds in different places. Ships that entered the drift often never returned, and those that did come back brought stories of impossible things that drove their crews to madness. The Galactic Council had spent centuries carefully mapping the edges of this dangerous zone and placing warning beacons to keep travelers away. Everyone knew that the drift was impassable. Everyone knew that nothing could cross it safely. But rumors began to spread that humans had done exactly that. Not officially, of course. No human expedition had ever been approved by the Council when they were still members. But travelers and traders and scouts reported seeing human vessels appearing in sectors that should have taken them years to reach by normal routes. Stories circulated about human colonies in places the Council had declared completely unreachable. Deputy Intelligence. Director Koss stood before a closed session of the Council. Leadership with a report that made everyone in the room very uncomfortable. He told them that long-range sensors had detected human activity in at least 12 star systems located beyond the drift boundary. Crixel immediately declared that this was impossible. He insisted that the drift could not be crossed, and that these reports must be errors or fabrications. Koss replied calmly that the drift was impassable for Council species. He said it appeared that humans had found a way. Through Vextolen studied the report carefully and asked how they were accomplishing this feat. He wanted to know what technology they were using to cross a barrier that had stopped every other civilization. For millions of years, Koss admitted that they did not know. He explained that humans were not using any drive technology that Council scientists recognized. He said that whatever method they had developed, they had created it after leaving the Council, which meant they had invented it in less than 5 years. Chamber became very quiet as everyone considered what this meant. Someone suggested that humans must have stolen research from Council databases while they were still members. Perhaps they had taken secrets that explained how to do this seemingly impossible thing. Koss shook his head. He reported that they had audited every record and every file and found that humans had taken nothing that could explain what they were now doing. He said that whatever this new technology was, humanity had created it entirely on their own. Crixel looked uncertain for the first time that anyone could remember. He asked what humans were doing out there beyond the drift. He wanted to know what they were building in those distant systems, where no one could see them. Koss paused for a long moment before answering. He admitted that this question was what concerned them most. He said that they had no idea what humanity was planning, and no way to find out. Far away on the human colony world of New Portland, former Ambassador Laura Bennett stood on her office balcony watching the sun set over the mountains. She had a new title now as Director of External Affairs, though she often joked that the position was meaningless, since humanity had no external affairs to speak of anymore. Kevin Tate found her there as he often did in the evenings. He handed her a tablet containing the latest communication attempt from the Council. She read it without any change in her expression and told him that they wanted to discuss resuming trade relations. Tate nodded and said that the Council was running out of options. He mentioned that the Kaleri colony program in the Varus cluster had completely failed because it turned out that terraforming was much harder than they had thought. Bennett set the tablet aside and looked back at the sunset. She said that she was not surprised. She told Tate that she had known this would happen eventually because the Council had been coasting on old technology and old alliances for far too long. She said they had forgotten how to innovate, and forgotten how to struggle, and forgotten what it meant to truly fight for survival. Tate asked what they should tell the Council in response. Bennett answered with a single word: nothing. Tate repeated the word back to her as a question. She turned to face him with calm certainty in her eyes. She said that the Council had made their choice when they voted to expel humanity. They had chosen politics over partnership and fear over friendship. Now they would have to live with the consequences of that choice. She picked up the tablet again and changed the subject. She said that humanity had its own concerns now, and that the drift expansion was ahead of schedule. The new drive systems were performing better than anyone had predicted, and there was still the matter of the signal. Tate asked if she still believed the signal was genuine. Bennett nodded and said that the analysts were now certain of it. She told him that something was out there beyond the edge of explored space, something ancient and powerful. 10 years had passed since humanity left the Galactic Council, and in that time, they had been very busy. The human exploration vessel Horizon dropped out of drift space at the very edge of the known universe, and Captain Samuel Price stood on the bridge staring at something that should not exist. He was a tall man in his late 40s with gray at his temples and scars on his hands from years of working on ships. He had commanded this mission for 3 years, and had crossed the drift 17 times. He had seen things that would have driven earlier generations completely mad, but nothing had prepared him for what now filled the view screen. Ahead of them, stretching across a span of space, larger than most star systems, was a structure. It was ancient beyond any measurement they could make, and its surfaces were covered in strange writing that predated any known civilization. Lights pulsed slowly along its edges in patterns that seemed almost alive. And somehow, despite being millions of years old, it was clearly waiting for them. Navigation Officer Maria Santos checked her instruments for the 4th time because she could not believe what they were telling her. She finally spoke and confirmed that the captain was seeing what she was seeing. She said they were all seeing it. Communications Officer Derek Huang looked up from his station with wonder in his eyes. He reported that the signal they had been following was coming from inside the structure. He said it was much stronger now and that it seemed to be guiding them toward an entrance. Price had spent his entire career preparing for moments of discovery, but this was beyond anything he had imagined. He gave the order to take them in slowly and carefully. The horizon approached what appeared to be an entrance to the structure. It was a vast opening that could have swallowed entire planets without difficulty. As they crossed the threshold, lights began to activate along the interior walls, illuminating a passageway that seemed to stretch on forever into the darkness ahead. Santos whispered that something knew they were there. Price nodded and said that of course it did. He reminded her that it had been calling to them across the vastness of space. Whatever had built this place had wanted them to come. They traveled deeper into the structure for 3 hours following the signal and the guiding lights. The passageway twisted and turned, but never felt threatening. It felt more like being welcomed home after a very long journey. Finally, they reached the heart of the structure, and what they found there would change everything humanity understood about the universe. It was a library, a repository of knowledge collected from civilizations that had risen and fallen across billions of years of cosmic history. There were star maps showing galaxies that had died long before Earth's sun was even born. There were technical specifications for technologies that seemed like pure magic. There were records of species that had achieved wonders beyond imagination and warnings about threats that had destroyed them. And at the very center of this vast collection of knowledge, there was a message. The message had been recorded in thousands of different languages, including several that human translators could understand. Price stood before the display and read the words aloud, so his entire crew could hear them. The message said that those who reached this place had proven themselves worthy. It said they had crossed the barrier that stopped all other species. They had chosen growth over stagnation and struggle over comfort. What they found here was their inheritance to use as they saw fit. The universe was vast, and they were no longer alone in it. Price read the message again and again, trying to absorb its full meaning. Humanity had been chosen, not by accident and not by luck, but because they had refused to give up when everything seemed hopeless. They had crossed the drift when everyone said it was impossible. They had survived exile and isolation and emerged stronger than before. Huang finally broke the silence and asked what they should do now. Price turned to face his crew with determination in his eyes. He told them they would document everything they could find. They would download as much information as their systems could hold. And then they would go home because humanity needed to see what they had discovered. The journey back took 2 weeks, and during that time the crew barely slept. They cataloged thousands of files and translated what they could and tried to understand the sheer scope of what the repository contained. There was enough knowledge here to advance human civilization by thousands of years. There were answers to questions they had not even thought to ask, and there were warnings. Deep in the archives, they found records of something terrible, something that existed at the edge of reality itself, something that had destroyed countless civilizations across billions of years. The ancient builders of the repository had not been able to stop it, but they had learned to predict when it would return. And according to their calculations, that time was approaching, when the horizon finally returned to human. Space Captain Price delivered his report directly to Director Laura Bennett. She listened without interruption as he described everything they had found. When he finished, she sat in silence for a long moment. She finally spoke and said that this changed everything. She said humanity now had responsibilities they had never imagined, and power they had never sought. She asked Price if he understood what this meant for their future. Price nodded slowly. He said it meant they could no longer hide from the galaxy. Whatever was coming would threaten everyone, and humanity might be the only species capable of stopping it. The news spread quickly through human space. Within 6 months, every colony knew about the repository and what it contained. Within a year, the first technologies derived from its archives were being tested and refined, faster than light communication that did not require. Relay stations became reality. Medical treatments that could extend human lifespans by centuries were developed. Energy generation systems that made everything they had used before look primitive came online across dozens of worlds. Ships were built using principles that Council scientists would not understand for thousands of years. And yes, there were weapons. Terrible weapons designed to fight threats that most species could not even comprehend. Kevin Tate stood in Director Bennett's office, reviewing the latest reports. He observed that the military applications alone could completely shift the balance of power across the entire galaxy, Bennett acknowledged. This with a simple nod. Tate continued and said that the Council would eventually find out about all of this. He reminded her that they had spies and informants everywhere, and that secrets this big could not stay hidden forever. Bennett set down her report and looked at him directly. She said that what happened next would depend entirely on how the Council chose to approach them. 2 more years passed before the Council finally learned the truth about what humanity had discovered. By then, human territory had expanded to over 100 star systems, and most of them were located beyond the drift barrier where Council ships could not follow. Human vessels were faster and stronger than anything the older species had ever built. Human technology had leaped forward by millennia in just a few short years. High Arbiter Extolan convened an emergency session of the full Council. He looked ancient now, and the weight of every decision he had ever made seemed to press down on his shoulders. He announced that they had to make contact with humanity, no matter the cost. Crixel spoke bitterly and said that humans would never agree to talk with them. He reminded the Council that humanity had ignored every communication for 12 years, and there was no reason to believe that would change now. Vextolan replied that they would go to humanity in person then. He proposed sending a diplomatic mission directly to human space to speak with them face to face. Another representative asked what purpose such a mission would serve. He pointed out that humanity had no reason to negotiate with the Council, since they clearly did not need anything the older species could offer. Vextolan SIs swept across the chamber. He said they would give humanity a reason by offering them what they had wanted from the very beginning. He said they would offer respect and acknowledgement and a genuine apology, if that was what it took. He raised a hand to silence the objections he knew were coming. He admitted that he understood how difficult this would be for many of them. But he said they were running out of options, and the galaxy was changing around them. If they did not adapt to this new reality, they would become completely irrelevant. The vote was close, but it passed. A diplomatic mission would be assembled and sent to human space. They would offer friendship and partnership and whatever else was required to rebuild the relationship they had so foolishly destroyed. None of them had any. The idea what they would find when they arrived or how much the young species they had once dismissed had truly changed. The Council diplomatic vessel arrived at the edge of human space 3 months after the vote. It was the finest ship the Council could provide, with gleaming white hull plates and advanced systems that represented the very best of what the older species could build. Representatives from all 12 member species were aboard, and at the head of the delegation was Ambassador Krelvex, who had spent his long career negotiating peace treaties between warring empires. He had never felt so completely out of his depth in his entire life. Human space was nothing like the reports had suggested. The intelligence they had gathered over the years had painted a picture of struggling colonies barely surviving on the edge of known. What Krelvex saw through the viewport was something entirely different. The colonies were thriving with cities that gleamed under artificial suns in orbital, platforms that stretched for hundreds of kilometers. Ships moved through the system using drive signatures that Council sensors could not even identify. Construction yards built vessels at a pace that should have been impossible. And everywhere he looked, there was activity, with people building and creating and expanding as if they had unlimited energy and unlimited ambition. His aide stood beside him and whispered that humanity had accomplished more in 15 years than most species managed in centuries. Krelvex could only nod in response. There were no words adequate to describe what he was feeling. The delegation was escorted to the surface of New Portland by a human shuttle that moved faster and more smoothly than anything in the Council fleet. They landed at a port in the capital city and were greeted by officials who were polite but not warm. Everything was efficient and professional, but there was no friendship in any of it. They were taken to a large meeting hall in the center of the city where Director Laura Bennett was waiting for them. She sat at the head of a long table surrounded by advisors and military officers. She looked older than the images in the Council files, but there was a sharpness in her eyes that made Krelvex immediately cautious. She rose to greet him and welcomed the delegation to New Portland with perfect diplomatic courtesy. Krelvex thanked her for receiving them, and the two groups took their seats on opposite sides of the table. The traditional greetings were exchanged, and the formal phrases were spoken, and then finally they were able to discuss the actual purpose of the visit. Krelvex began by stating that the Council wished to discuss the possibility of renewed relations with humanity. He acknowledged that mistakes had been made in the past and expressed hope that both sides could move forward together. Bennett's expression did not change even slightly. She asked what kind of relations the Council had in mind. Krelvex explained that they were thinking of trade agreements initially followed by cultural exchange programs. He suggested that perhaps in time humanity might even consider rejoining the Council as a full member. Bennett repeated the word membership in a flat tone that revealed nothing. Krelvex quickly added that there would, of course, be significant adjustments to reflect humanity's current status. He said that humans had clearly demonstrated capabilities that warranted a much more prominent role in galactic affairs. Bennett leaned back in her chair and studied him for a long moment. She said that 15 years ago the Council had expelled humanity because the Colry complained about colonies on worlds they had never actually bothered to settle. She reminded him that 11 species had voted to cast humans out and that not a single the voice had spoken in their defense. Krelvex acknowledged that it had been a regrettable decision. Bennett nodded slowly and agreed that yes, it certainly had been regrettable. She added that it had been particularly regrettable for the Council. Krelvex felt the conversation slipping away from him like water through his fingers. He tried to regain control by stating that the Council understood humanity had legitimate grievances. He said they were prepared to make significant concessions to address those concerns. Bennett asked what kind of concessions. Krelvex listed everything the Council had authorized him to offer. A formal apology for the expulsion delivered before the full assembly. Restoration of all previous trade agreements with terms highly favorable to humanity. Permanent seats on the High Council for human representatives with full voting rights. Guaranteed expansion rights in sectors that had previously been denied to them. Bennett listened to the entire list without any visible reaction. When he finished, she glanced at her advisors. Kevin Tate shrugged slightly. The others showed similar indifference, as if nothing Krelvex had said mattered to them at all. She turned back to face him and asked if he knew what humanity had. I've actually been doing for the last 15 years. Krelvex admitted that they had some intelligence on them. Matter. Bennett told him bluntly that his intelligence was wrong. She said she would enlighten him about the true situation. She activated a display on the wall behind her. Star maps appeared, showing human territory. The area marked in blue was enormous and far larger than anything Council estimates had suggested. It spread across vast regions of space, including many systems beyond the drift. barrier. Bennett began explaining what the maps showed. She said humanity had colonized 217 star systems. They had developed technologies that Council scientists could not understand, let alone replicate. They had made contact with 3 civilizations beyond the edge of explored space that the Council did not even know existed. She paused to let that information sink in before continuing. She told him they had also accessed the repository, which was a structure left behind by the very first intelligent species in the universe. It contained knowledge accumulated across billions of years of cosmic history. Krelvex stared at the display with his mouth hanging open. He finally managed to say that. What she was describing was simply not possible. Bennett deactivated the display and told him that, and yet here they were. She said the Council had expelled humanity because the older species were afraid of what humans might become. She suggested they should have been afraid of what humanity would become without them. Krelvix asked her directly what she was trying to tell him. Bennett spoke.
Ow.
Clearly and without emotion. She said that humanity did not need the Council anymore. They did not need trade agreements or cultural exchanges or seats on the High Council. They had everything they needed right here in their own territory. Krelvix felt desperation rising in his chest. He asked why she had agreed to meet with them if humanity wanted nothing from the Council. Bennett's smile appeared, but there was no warmth or friendliness in it. She said she had agreed to this meeting because she wanted them to understand something important. She told him the galaxy was changing, and that the old order the Council represented was dying. Something new was being born, and humanity was going to be at the center of it, whether the Council liked it or not. She stood, and her advisors stood with her. She told Krelvex to go back to the Council and report everything he had seen and heard. She said they should know that humanity was no longer interested in being anyone's junior, partner, or a convenient scapegoat or source of cheap labor and innovative ideas. She walked toward the door, but paused before leaving. She said that if the Council wanted to survive what was coming, they would have to earn humanity's respect. She made it clear that humanity would not be the ones working to rebuild this relationship. Krelvix found his voice and asked what she meant by what was coming. Bennett turned to look at him one final time. She explained that the repository had not only contained knowledge but also warnings. She said something was awakening at the edge of the universe. Something ancient and incredibly dangerous. When it finally arrived, the galaxy would need champions willing to fight against it. She looked at him with something that might have been pity in her eyes. She said the real question was whether the Council would prove worthy of protection, or whether they would simply be swept away, along with everything else. She left the room and the doors closed behind her. The Council delegation sat in stunned silence, trying to process everything they had just heard. Finally, Krelvex spoke and said they needed to return to the Council immediately. He said the High Arbiter needed to hear this report as soon as possible. No one in the delegation disagreed with him. They had come hoping to rebuild a relationship, and instead they had learned that humanity had become something far beyond what any of them had imagined. The journey home felt much longer than the journey out. The Council chamber was packed with more beings than it had ever held before. Every representative from every member species was present along with their aides and advisors and observers. People stood in the aisles and crowded near the doors because there was no more room to sit. The tension in the air was so thick it felt difficult to breathe. Ambassador Krelvex stood at the central podium and delivered his report to the assembled gathering. He told them everything he had witnessed during his visit to human space. He described the size of their territory and the advancement of their technology and the confidence with which they spoke about the future. He explained about the repository and the ancient knowledge it contained. And finally, he told them about the warning. When he finished speaking, the chamber erupted into chaos. Crixel of the Kalari shouted above the noise and declared that the humans were obviously bluffing. He insisted they were trying to intimidate the Council with exaggerated claims and empty threats. Krelvex responded firmly and said he had seen it all with his own eyes. He stated that human technology was real, and their expansion was real, and if their warning about the coming danger was accurate, then the entire galaxy had perhaps 20 years to prepare. High Arbiter. Vextolen raised his hand, and slowly the chamber fell silent. He looked ancient now, with deep lines carved into his face and weariness in every movement. He spoke slowly, and each word seemed to carry enormous weight. He admitted that they had made terrible mistakes. He said they had allowed fear and politics to drive away a species that could have been their greatest ally. Now they were facing the consequences of those choices. And there was no one to blame but themselves. Someone in the crowd asked what he suggested they do now. Vextolen replied that they must prepare for whatever was coming. He said that if humanity was willing to share what they had learned, then the council should accept that help with genuine gratitude. If humans chose not to share, then the council would have to develop their own defenses as best they could. Either way, he said they needed to acknowledge that the galaxy they once knew was gone forever. Something new was taking its place, and they could either adapt or fade into irrelevance. Another representative asked about humanity, specifically and what would happen with that relationship. Vextolen was quiet for a long moment before answering. He said that humanity had proven something the older species had forgotten long ago. He explained that real growth required struggle, and real strength required adversity. The council had tried to keep humans small because their potential was frightening. Instead, they had forced humanity to become exactly what they were always meant to be. He looked around the chamber one final time, and his gaze touched every face in the crowd. He said they had created their own greatest rival through their own foolish actions. Now they could only hope that this rival might also become their salvation. The chamber remained silent as everyone absorbed the full meaning of his words. For the first time in centuries, the mighty Galactic Council had no idea what the future would hold. 3 months passed after that fateful session, and the Council waited anxiously for some sign from human space. They sent no more diplomatic missions because they understood that the next move had to come from humanity. They could only wait and hope that the young species they had wronged might find their hearts to forgive. Then one day a message arrived through official channels. It was brief and written in formal diplomatic language. The communication stated that humanity was willing to share information about the approaching threat. They would provide defensive technologies and strategic intelligence to help the Council prepare. In exchange, they wanted nothing at all. The Council could barely believe what they were reading. Several representatives asked for confirmation that the translation was accurate. The message was confirmed to be genuine. Humanity was offering help freely, without any conditions or demands. Attached, one confused representative asked why humans would do this after everything that had happened. The answer came in the final lines of the message. It explained that when the darkness arrived, the galaxy would need every species capable of fighting against it. Even those who had failed humanity in the past would be needed for the battles ahead. The message was officially signed by Director Laura Bennett on behalf of the United Human Territories. But at the very bottom, written by hand in human script, was a single additional line. It said that the Council had one chance to prove they had truly changed and warned them not to waste this opportunity. The representatives read that final line over and over again. They had been offered something unprecedented in galactic history: forgiveness without conditions, mercy without demands, help from those they had abandoned. In their hour of need, whether any of them actually deserved such generosity was a question none of them could answer. Far away on New Portland, the sun was setting once again over the mountains. Laura Bennett stood on her balcony, watching the colors spread across the sky as she had done so many evenings before. Kevin Tate stood beside her, holding a tablet that contained reports from across human space. He asked her if she thought the Council would actually learn anything from this experience. She considered the question carefully before responding. She said that some of them might learn and some of them might change. She admitted that she was not certain it truly mattered either way. Tate asked her to explain what she meant by that. Bennett turned to face him with thoughtful eyes. She said that when they were expelled from the Council, she had been so angry she could barely think straight. She had wanted to make the older species suffer for what they had done. She had dreamed of the day when humanity would be powerful, enough to take revenge on everyone who had wronged them. Tate nodded because he remembered those dark days very well. Bennett continued and said that somewhere along the way her feelings had changed. Watching humanity grow and adapt and overcome every obstacle had taught her something important. She realized that revenge was not strength. Cruelty was not power. The ability to destroy was nothing compared to the ability to build. She looked back at the sunset and spoke quietly. She said humanity could crush the council if they wanted to. They could take everything the older species possessed and make them pay. For every insult and every slight and every life lost, due to their indifference, Tate asked if they were going to do any of those things. Bennett shook her head slowly. She said they would not, because that was not who humanity was. That was not who they chose to be. Tate asked what they were choosing instead. Bennett smiled, and this time there was genuine warmth in it. She said they were choosing to be better than those who had hurt them. They were choosing to help even those who did not deserve help. They were choosing to build rather than destroy, and to heal rather than wound. She said that perhaps in the end this was the most human thing of all. The refusal to become monsters even when monsters had tried to break them. In the distance, a ship lifted off from the spaceport carrying supplies to a world that had once been council territory. Humanity was helping them now, just as they had always offered to help before the vote and before the silence and before the long years of isolation. Difference was that now they expected nothing in return. Tate watched the ship climb into the darkening sky and asked one final question. He wanted to know if Bennett thought they were doing the right thing. She thought about everything that had happened over the past 15 years. The pain and the anger and the struggle, the discoveries and the growth and the transformation. The warning about what was coming and the knowledge that dark times lay ahead. She finally answered and said she did not know if they were doing the right thing. She said nobody ever really knew that until much later. But she believed they were doing the kind thing and the generous thing and the human thing. She said that would have to be enough. The last light faded from the sky, and the stars began to appear one by one. Somewhere out there in the infinite darkness, something ancient was stirring. Something that had destroyed countless civilizations was preparing to emerge once again. But this time would be different. This time humanity would be waiting, and they would not face the darkness alone.